Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Freese, and I'm the Director of the Center for Professional Education here at UTC. And I just want to thank each of you for your continued support of our supply chain programming. We appreciate you all being with us today. As I usually try to give a shout out to our partners and friends over at the Chattanooga Regional Manufacturing Association. And I see Ms. Megan King on here today. Thank you, as always, for your continued support of our effort. And I will put a little plug out. We are actively recruiting for folks to be a part of supply chain committee, which is what is the joint committee between CPE and CRMA to support supply chain community in the Chattanooga and Southeast Tennessee region. There's no commitment to participate, just give us your ideas and be a sounding board for other ideas. And we'll be having our first meeting actually in a little while. We'll be meeting on February the 23rd. So if you're interested in being part of that, even if you can't make the February 23rd meeting, just shoot me or Megan a message and let us know. We'd be happy to have you be part of it. All right, so today, our program today gives us an opportunity to highlight a local Chattanooga-based company that has established really a global footprint through the services they provide. And that company's name is Stratus Grid. And today we've got their CEO, Mr. Chris Hurst, is going to talk about how lean principles apply to modern supply chain technology solutions. We know that software is going to continue to be a key element of any successful supply chain management strategy. And as such, the technologies that are being deployed to support an organization's supply chain work best when they've been developed with a deep understanding of their processes and practices. So with that, I will turn it over to the illustrious Chris Barnes, and he will introduce our speaker. Chris.
Yeah, thank you, John. And before we do, I've got it now. I met Savannah Champion earlier, but now I noticed that there are two Savannah champions, and one looks like Savannah. The other one, I'm not sure. She may be a little bit of a poser. So I'm just going to call. I'm not going to say you don't belong here. I'm just saying you got an interesting name there, sir.
So the real Savannah champion, please stand up.
Yes, there you are. So thanks, John. Yeah. So I don't know if anyone knows, but I'm in the supply chain world a long time. And in recent years, probably 5 to 10, I don't know if you call that recent, but it's been a lot about technology, a lot of things you can do now that you couldn't do, 3, 5, 10 years ago, and I call it the art of the possible, because of, new technologies that are available, new ways of thinking about things. And that's just life. You get better, whatever it is, better speakers, better phones, everything changes. But so in the world of technology, it's all about software as a service. I say it's all about. A lot of companies are moving to software as a service for various reasons, obviously from a cost, capital expenditure standpoint, the support roles, what it takes to develop those types of solutions. So I evangelize a lot about software as a service. And I thought, well, let's get some experts in to talk about, what is software as a service? What does it mean? And then how do you implement it? So originally I thought, well, that's going to be a pretty boring topic unless you're interested in, unless you're interested in supply chain is boring, which is a podcast, by the way. That's a small plug. And then I started asking Chris what he knew about supply chain or anything. And I said, are people be interested in people like Goldratt or theory of constraints or Deming, statistical process control? And he said, oh, sure, I know all about that stuff. And I said, well, how do you know? And he said, because it applies to software development. So that's to me, that's interesting. How do you apply theory of constraints? And anybody who knows knows about Eli Goldratt? Anybody know about that, or want to just take a quick show of hands? I do. Anyone else? Raul does, because you had the classes. So thank you for that. So it's interesting. I look at it from a process continuous improvement standpoint, and I'm curious to hear about Chris. So maybe Chris, if you can just introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and then and keep that in mind. It's going to be an open dialogue. So just tell us a little bit about who you are and how you think Goldratt applies to software development.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I'm Chris Hurst. I'm CEO at Stratus Grid. I've come up through an engineering background, but I had the pleasure of working inside of some logistics organizations pretty early on in my career. And one of the things that I got to go through there was lean training. So, that was back before, if you're familiar with technology buzzwords, agile, DevOps, these kinds of principles were really well established and well known in the technology space. And it was all about lean then, because I was in a logistics company. And so we started taking lean principles and applying it to technology. And kind of years later, I ended up getting involved in DevOps days. So we've organized a couple of DevOps days here in Chattanooga. And, you know, these kind of principles on the technology side have really come and taken shape. And so it's something that I'm really passionate about. I definitely wouldn't say I'm the most knowledgeable person in the world about it, but something that I really like talking about. And I think it's important to bring visibility to it, because I think a lot of people, you know, view it as being kind of magical or, you know, in a black box. And even people inside of the technology industry, I think, really don't understand the first principles of it. Like, there's a lot of books and writings about how to apply it, but not a lot of books that help people understand the principles the way that you'd understand from reading like The Goal or Critical Chain or Out of the Crisis from Deming, who's also, you know, I think inspired a lot of thought on it. So I just like to start the conversation, and, you know, hope everybody can learn from it and I can learn from it.
Yeah. So The Goal, anybody on the call has read The Goal? It might, based on our audience, I would say anybody not read The Goal, but yeah, it's to me, it was interesting. I gave it to one of John Freese's workmates, who's not a supply chain person, and she actually read it, and she thought it was good as a non-supply chain person. But it's very novelistic. It's a short, it's an easy read, and it kind of applies to everything. So I'm also a fan. Go ahead.
It's funny, Chris. That was the, you know, and this is dating myself. So going back to the 80s, that was one of the very first books I ever read. And it was given to me by your COO.
Yeah, Kevin? Who do you work with now?
I'm working for Infor.
Okay, I got it. So
I came up through working with Bellini, and I'm actually a certified Jonah from the back in the days in the 80s. So it's the first book he had to read.
That's great. Yeah, I read it, the book I didn't start until 91. And that's where I grew up in just in time and continuous improvement. And that was one of the early books. So yeah, I think it's great. It's very foundational for just continuous improvement in life. Also, Chris Hurst, I'm a fan of, before Goldratt, I was a fan of Deming. So you have experience with Deming as well, or philosophy?
Yeah, I think so. I started with Goldratt and then I ended up going backwards into Deming. And I think that probably most of the value that can be applied, like it's easy to apply, is inside of Goldratt's books. And I really like all three of his, well, there's more than three. The three books from Goldratt that I really like are The Goal, It's Not Luck, and Critical Chain. I think all three of them apply really heavily to technology organizations. But Deming is great. And I think what I got from Deming that was really, really valuable to me, and I think is really valuable to anyone that's either has to manage software organizations or is thinking about software, is just the view on quality and what quality is really about. You know, quality is just about reduction in variance. That's something that I don't think Goldratt does as good of a job breaking down scientifically, and Deming does a really good job of helping you understand quality and how it's about variance and how variance affects your cycle time and your throughput, especially if you have more stages.
I'd be honored to add to that if you don't mind.
Phil Donahue's here. Thank you, Phil. Oh, I'm sorry, not Donahue.
Well, I prefer Donahue, but what have you. As earlier in my life, I had the extreme privilege of being able to work with Dr. Deming. And so I have found what I learned from him, not just from his books, but also in person, to be life-changing. And his teachings and his understanding of what he called a system of profound knowledge had elements that I think are profoundly beneficial to software development and supply chain. So I agree, Chris. His thoughts on quality and achieving it through reduction of variation are vital. And there are a lot of ways you can get to quality, but doing it through variation reduction has all kinds of peripheral benefits that you don't get in some of the other routes. So also his ideas on theory of a system and on psychology. And to your point earlier, Chris, about, and somebody else said earlier, technology has advanced so much in the last couple of decades. We now have tools that we didn't have then. and the ability to use some of those tools in today's context, to your point, Chris Hurst, to apply some of these teachings in new and very, very powerful ways is quite phenomenal. And so I could talk all day about all this, but I just wanted to emphasize and add to what you'd said there, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, Phil, what do you do when you're not
I'm president of Innovect. We're a capacity building company. And I was personally and professionally impacted by Dr. Deming so much that it literally changed the course of my life and put me on the path that I am now. So we help companies and people use art and science in a collaborative way. And thank you.
No, that's great. Yeah, it's interesting. I saw, people are sharing comments there, so I don't want to read them all, but check them out if you get a chance. But someone just posted a podcast. But I have a podcast called Supply Chain is Boring. And what's interesting is you mentioned that, I don't know if you said it, but Deming's, he passed away. But that's the type of people that I want to interview. And that's what I'm learning now is those thought leaders are passing away as they get older. So it's interesting you say that, but I wish I would have had the chance to meet him, but obviously didn't. That's great stories. Another thing about the books. So Chris Hurst, you talked about the goal. That's definitely a must read. I would suggest Critical Chain and It's Not Luck. I haven't read those. They're in my library, but I haven't read them. So I would suggest them, but I can't because I haven't read them. Out of the Crisis is good, but it's a bit long. It's more of a textbook. So with Deming, I would suggest it's 11 something of Deming, or 11 points of Deming. It's by Mary Walton as a sub-writer. Check that one out. It's a little bit of an easier read if you want to just understand the basics of Deming. And then on Software as a Service, which is kind of how we got started on this discussion, Chris Hurst, I suggest The Big Switch by Nicholas Carr. It's getting old now, but it really talks about, it was written before the whole revolution into SaaS and cloud computing, but it talks about the similarities of cloud computing dating back to the electrification of the country and how there was a lot of resistance to go to SaaS from on-premise early on. So, but it's a great read as well. It's a little bit of a history book plus a bit of a technology book. So I forgot the question, Chris, but whatever it was, that was the answer. So how does that apply? How does Deming and Goldratt apply to like applications and software as a service or development or whatever we want to call it?
Yeah, I think development is really where I think it applies the most. You see lean principles applied to service delivery as well. But in software, you're actually creating things and you have more complex supply chains for your software than you do with, like IT services a lot of the time. I think there's a couple of initiatives that have been founded inside of software development that are underpinning a lot of the change that we're seeing. But I think that people don't realize that they're really just founded on lean. So Agile and DevOps are two of the really big ones that, they're very much focused on reducing work in process, reducing cycle time, increasing quality, and putting quality earlier and earlier in the process, which, if you read the goal, that's you're basically getting those foundational knowledge pieces and you get a lot of the mathematics and the reasoning behind it and how to apply it, which I think is really valuable to understand. If you can understand lean and then apply it to software, I think it does a much better job than a lot of the software driven books at helping you understand the principles and then design a solution that's right. I actually think.
So Chris, are you guys you'll develop software for anybody? Is that right? They don't have to only be in supply chain, or is that?
Right. Yep.
Okay, because that's, obviously my life focuses around supply chain. So I was just curious. I'm going to make sure that they understand you're just not strictly a supply chain company. You can help anybody with that idea. And it's interesting because, sorry, Chris, go ahead. You were going to say something.
I was just say, it's really broad what we work for, but we find lean principles coming up a lot. So like, I'll give an example that I think people wouldn't have expected, but was massively valuable. We helped a machine learning company that was delivering models for factories. So machine learning models for factories to do preventative maintenance, basically identify problems before it happens so that it could be scheduled. And one of the biggest issues that they had was how long it would take to get a factory spun up and running and on their models and profitable, because they were a startup. And we ended up basically doing a whole bunch of process mapping, and what we came out at the other end with them was a software design to help them do a single piece flow for their models, because what they've been doing was really large batches, right? Like almost entire sections of a factory at a time for models. And instead we said, like, how small can you do it? Right, let's just focus on getting one there and getting value from it, then another getting value, another getting value, another getting value, which is very much just taken straight out of Lean principles, but it really changed for them how quickly they were able to deliver value to their customers and how quickly they were able to get money back. So it's really applicable even outside of supply chain.
Sure, it sounds like, well, it's about profit for companies. People don't buy technology for technology's sake, right? The bottom line is a business purpose. What's interesting, Chris, is you mentioned single flow or single piece flow. What I'm seeing now in the market and becoming popular is what is it called? A batch size of one. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but it's getting down to, if you look at just in time, you want to make smaller batch sizes. But I think that the goal now is really just if you can make one of anything productively and profitably, and that's going to solve a lot of problems. So I don't know if that's similar to single piece flow or not, but I think that's a goal everybody should be looking at.
Yeah, that's exactly single piece flow. And, that's just the tightest cycle time you can possibly have. So in software, it's really applicable. You used to see really huge releases, and then you've seen part of the centralization around platforms has been that it's easier to release software out to a SaaS service than to everybody's individual environments. So instead of having these long release windows where you're batching lots of changes, you're able to release more frequently, which decreases your cycle time and decreases your work in process, which ultimately increases your throughput, your adaptability, decreases how much capital you have to be carrying for your changes. If you look at companies like Amazon or Netflix or Facebook, a lot of their projects are increasingly getting more and more towards a release of one. So like a single piece flow end to end. And that allows such a rapid amount of change with such a small cycle time. And you have to have so little capital in order to start getting value from the new feature.
Yeah, and that's kind of when you talk about the capital expenditure, it's a business discussion as opposed to a technology. And that's really what that book, I forgot the book that I referenced, not Crossing the Tenant. What did I say? Nicholas Carr, I forgot what the title, Big Switch. Yeah, that's what they talk about is how you're shifting it from no longer do you need to invest $1 million in an SAP system. You can basically pay for it by the month. And isn't that really what SaaS kind of represents, Chris?
Yeah, SaaS is the really easy to understand version of that because it's all objective, right? I'm not buying hardware. So it's really easy to see that capital expense go away. I think the capital expense that's hidden that we really focus on with our clients and internally that I think not enough people think about is that all of those tickets that have work applied to them but aren't delivering you value in production yet for your software is all capital, right? Like all of that is inventory that you paid and put process time on, and you haven't gotten any value yet. It hasn't been delivered. So that's capital costs. And the really crazy thing is that with SaaS or, infrastructure as a service in Amazon's case, usually your cost of the platform costs a lot less than your engineering team cost. So it's pretty frequent if your cycle times are too long, that you're actually carrying even more capital in your progression, your cycle of change from your team than you carried with the hardware. But people don't usually see it that way.
Well, Raul Soto, he'll appreciate this being a past student of supply chain. Yeah, we talk about outsourcing as a strategy in supply chain management, really, or kind of, focusing on your core, what you do the best. And a lot of companies, they've developed IT organizations over the years because they have all these different solutions to support. So now they're almost an IT specialist, but that's really not their core competency. So SaaS is, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, it's almost like outsourcing that IT need or that IT capability. Is that correct?
It starts that way. What we've typically seen is that SaaSes end up never being a complete solution. Like very few people in a larger, even mid-sized organization can implement a SaaS and get all the features and visibility that they need from it. Really, they need to implement multiple SaaSes And then they need to consolidate data across it to make good, educated business decisions. And now you're back to writing software, and you've just kind of advanced it so that you can get those features at a lower cost. But now the bar has moved. Now, instead of that's the features we want, oh, that's just SaaS, that's commodity. But in order to compete, we can't only be in the commodity, we have to be pushing further. And now you're back to writing your own software.
Sure. And that's, sorry, go ahead. Somebody had a question or comment.
I was going to say, I think that if you look at, oh, Evan, what's that called? Where you map from commodity through Genesis.
Wardley mapping.
Thank you. Yeah, if you look at Wardley mapping, I think SaaS makes a lot of sense in that map. Wardley mapping is where you map value chain, and then you map individual components of the value chain for your entire business for a specific customer set, from like Genesis, where it's completely net new, like you're launching rockets into space, to commodity, like you flip the switch on and off for the power. In SaaS, I think is really just things that are becoming commoditized and of getting consolidated into platforms. But you're still going to have companies that are differentiating and taking the market, that are operating further over in the value chain and more Genesis or custom functionality. And if you're not doing that, you end up falling behind. So SaaS will never be able to operate in that because it's not for a broad enough market. You're always going to need something customized to your specific needs.
So it looks like you work with Amazon Web Services. I think that's what the AWS represents. So I know some people are afraid of the SaaS. Maybe this is just more of a generic question, because of the proprietary data. They don't want people seeing their information. Is that still a concern, or how do you, in a SaaS world, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think SaaS and infrastructure as a service are two very different things. So I'll address them separately. So AWS is more infrastructure as a service, and I definitely hear a lot of people's concerns when we talk to them, especially in supply chain, because Amazon is a huge competitor in the supply chain space. The way I typically phrase it is, the agreements that are put in place, you have the ability to make it so that they can't see the data, right? Like, they give you those tools. Really, they want to make money off of the tools they built for their logistics company to be successful. And the really amazing thing for AWS, for anyone that's in supply chain, is you can take the technology stack that the largest competitor, like probably the most advanced supply chain company in the world at this point, just overall, that they built special tailored to their needs, and use them for your needs and just jump straight ahead. SaaS, I think, is a little bit different, because depending on the company and the agreements, they are much more likely to have visibility into your data. So infrastructure as a service, they provide you a very commodity layer, but you can encrypt all of your data and make it so that they can't see it. And that's just like a proper configuration. But SaaS, typically, they have direct access to the data, to the database. They can run queries across customers if they want to do that. So it's important to understand your legal agreements, important to understand who the company backing it is, and how valuable that data would be to them, and then understand what it would take to get it out and what it takes to work with it if it's still in. That if you can get all of your data out when you want to leave, that's really great. If you can't, you just have to be able to walk away from that later and understand what that cost would be to your business.
Okay.
Might be good to kind of explain single tenant versus multi-tenant SaaS as well. So I think a lot of people don't understand that.
Yeah, so single tenant SaaS versus multi-tenant SaaS, if you are creating it yourself, if you're the operator, so we work with a lot of SaaS platforms to help them make their offering, can be a variety of different things. So single tenant SaaS typically means everybody is inside of one shared database. That means you're sharing some risk, and it also means that there's a much higher chance that a specific security vulnerability or something similar would impact everybody's data instead of just one customer. Multi-customer SaaS means different things to different companies. Sometimes it means that they set up a completely separate infrastructure just for you. And sometimes it means, they've just put some very specific flags in the database to help separate out the data. And it's definitely important when you're talking with a company that you understand how your data is separated from other people's, what controls that they have in place, and what kind of guarantees that they give.
So I'm busy writing down all these names over here, Chris, so I apologize I wasn't paying attention, but all this discussion's beginning to sound all Greek to me, so I'm going to have to change the topic, because I think I'm going to get to the point I don't understand anything you're saying. So, but I'm just kidding. But so it looks like you got a big team here. I didn't realize there's so many people on the call from.
Boy, Chris, I hope you understand single tenant.
So, yeah. So Chris Childress, and it looks like you got a few people who are they with your organization as well? They got the same background.
Yep. No, we have a bunch of people on the call. We have a pretty heavy interest in Lean here. So all of our leadership actually has to read the book, The Goal.
Oh, yeah.
So it's required reading here, and it has mixed reviews depending on the person, but overall I think people like it. But we really incorporate the thinking into our organization pretty deeply. So there were a lot of people that were joining.
Well, let me add, this is a selfish question because I run enablement for a company about 650 employees. Is that, let me talk to Chris Childress or Savannah. Was that helpful that you had to read that book, or has it helped you in your job? I don't even know what your jobs are, but tell me that.
Yeah, for myself, and I can't speak for Savannah, obviously, but for myself, it didn't just help me to kind of rethink what I was doing in my job, but also to rethink what I was doing in my life. When you start with some of the allegorical tales of, the Boy Scout troop going through the woods and how he optimized the march, these are little things that kind of pop into your mind as you're going along in life. And when I look at, the ticket board and it's chock full of things that just aren't moving, I start to think, where are the constraints? What's actually blocking us here and why? And, can we resolve this simply by moving it around? Can we resolve this simply by rethinking, how we're approaching this? But yeah, it's been a really good source of ideas, just in general.
Yeah, that's good. I like the idea. Savannah, I don't know if you share similar experiences, but remember your boss is on the call, so.
Well, that's not intimidating. We have a pretty open, collaborative culture. I personally have not read the book yet. It is in my queue of things to do, but definitely after this call, I'm a lot more intrigued. Before starting this job, I was pretty unfamiliar with the ins and outs of supply chain. So I've been learning a lot in the past few months. I started back in the summer, and it's really interesting. I try to explain it to my friends who are outside of the industry, and they're like, how in the world could that be an interesting topic? And I'm like, you guys just have no idea. I mean, it affects everything in ways that you guys probably don't even understand. So it's been really interesting to get to learn from guys like Chris and Evan and everybody else on the team. So it's definitely in my queue of things to do.
Well, it sounds like you're surrounded with some very good thought leaders there. So that's exciting. And we're backing up against the clock. I'd like to get more people to talk in, but when I tell people when I'm traveling, it's always fun to sit next to me on a plane, because I never stop talking about supply chain, and people say, I don't know what supply chain is. I always say this: have you ever bought anything? As soon as they say yes, and I say, well, you're the reason for the supply chain. So that's an easy answer. So John, with that, we're backing up against the clock here. So I'll hand it to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Chris and Chris, both of you so much. I appreciate the time today, and I found the topic to be really interesting, and I hope everybody else did too. We are at 12:30, so we will say goodbye for now. But for those of you that tune in month to month, next month we will have someone from Steam Logistics, and they will be here to talk about capacity and constraints in the freight moving business. So stay, unless they've got all those challenges resolved by March, we'll see. No, I'm kidding. All right, everyone, have a great weekend. And don't forget, Monday's Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's. Thanks, John.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Nice to meet you.
Bye. Thank you.